Okay, so when you have clients that want to try to put themselves in a better situation, they're going to want to try to appeal to the emotions of the sellers. And that's when these Dear Seller love letters come into play. And the Virginia Association of Realtors attorneys actually came out publicly long after I had been saying, please, please, please do not write Dear Seller love letters. Do not present Dear Seller love letters, and said, we do not want you to use these Dear Seller love letters because they can contain fair housing violations so easily that you don't even know it. When we have multiple offer situations, in most cases, I won't even present the names of the clients, right? Because the names of a client could present an issue. So we are going to simply look at the terms, offer number 1, offer number 2, etc. So don't put yourself in a situation where you could be looked at as discriminating with your sellers, right, by presenting these letters. And do not allow your buyers to get into a situation where it could get muddy by presenting these. And I will tell you, there are agents that will still present them. There are agents that will still have their clients write them. And every once in a while, that's what will make or break the deal. It's not worth it, okay? And if an agent tells you that that's what won it, they're risking a lot by telling you that that's what won the deal, right? So that's my soapbox moment on that. But I'm gonna send out an email through Showing Time to everyone and just let them know, don't write the letter. And if you write the letter, my seller has directed me that we are not presenting the letters. Now, after you ratify, you can certainly show all of the letters and all of them.
Oh yeah, she's just doing the.
But we're not gonna consider that because it's not a term in the contract.
Nice
Okay?
thinking. Nice.
Thank you, because my client lost the house because of that letter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, I mean, names. You know, the buyers want to write things like, oh, you know, I could see myself raising my family in your home. Boom, family. There's your first fair housing violation, right? I mean, so it's like you can't. They put pictures of themselves on these letters. It's just you just can't. You can't write these letters really without putting yourself at risk. Okay, so let's get back to the offer documents where the terms do matter, right? Let's go into our contingencies and clauses addendum from yesterday. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
All right. Contingencies and clauses addendum. So what this document is this is one additional 4-page document that the Forms Committee put together. Instead of having a different 1-page document for each contingency that could go in place, they just put everything together and said, look, if something applies, then you would invoke that paragraph by initialing on the side. So there's lots of these hash marks on the side. You only initial where it applies. Okay, in most cases, this contingencies and clauses addendum is going to be used for home sale contingency, the home of choice contingency, or if you need to have as-is condition. Right now, we're seeing a few more of the 1031 exchanges, which are talked about in this document as well. All right, so let's get into the contingencies that it's listing for us. Sale of buyer's property and kickout. This is your kickout clause. What this says is that the contract is contingent until 9 p.m. blank days after ratification for the sale of the buyer's property. So the buyer wants to buy your client's listing, but the buyer has a home to sell. So they need that home sale contingency, okay? So the seller says, fine, we will give you some time to sell that home. There's a few caveats. The first caveat is that the seller will continue to offer the property for sale, Okay, that's active under contract. They'll continue to allow showings. And they could accept bona fide backup offers to the contract until the contingency is satisfied or removed. Okay, so what happens here? You're ratified with buyer who has the house to sell. Buyer number 2 comes in and says, I want to buy the property and I don't have a house to sell. So the seller has to decide, do they want to accept the backup offer? They do. They ratify as a backup offer. Okay, so now you have buyer number 1, who's the primary, who has the house to sell. Buyer number 2 is a backup. At that point, the seller delivers notice to buyer number 1 and says, okay, I have somebody that can get to closing easier than you. You have blank number of days to remove or satisfy your contingency, or else I'm going to kick out your contract and move on to the next buyer who can get to the closing table. Okay? So the number of days that goes here is how many days you're going to give the buyer that has the house to sell time to actually get it done and remove the contingency, or you're going to kick them out. This section also addresses if the home is not yet on the market, that the buyer's property will be listed in the MLS with a real estate brokerage, how many number of days from the time that you ratify this contract, okay, and what the price is. Because if it's not yet listed, then the seller has no idea whether or not the buyer who's coming to buy their home is going to be reasonable with the price they're listing their home for, right? So they want to make sure that it's reasonable that that home would sell, that they're not overpricing it, that they're not trying to do for sale by owner and not have it marketed properly, those types of things.
Shannon, I have a question just on point 1, just so I'm clear. The number that goes in the second one sets a new time frame.
In section 1 or in section 2?
In section 1.
In section 1, this sets a time frame for when a backup offer is received.
Okay, so in the first one, you're saying the contract is contingent upon the sale of this property within so many days. So then they get a second offer.
Yes.
And then can they shorten that time period?
Now, what happens when they get the second offer is that they ratify that second offer as a backup.
Right.
Right. And then they say to the first offer, okay, we are going to give you a couple of days to decide that you can move forward without your home sale, or we're going to void your contract and move on to the next one. Okay. If in the number of days up top,
Right.
this would be like 30 or 45 days is what you would have in the number up top, because you have to get, it's not just getting an offer on the home, it's getting through their due diligence on the home as well. If at the end of that number of days, if they have not satisfied or removed their contingency, or there hasn't been mutual agreement to extend that number of days, the contract is automatically void. It doesn't automatically extend.
Okay.
This contract is automatically void.
So if you give the first buyer 45 days to sell their property,
Mm-hmm.
and 10 days after that, you get a ratified backup offer.
Mm-hmm.
You can come down to paragraph 1 and say, okay, now you only have 3 days to sell your home.
That's right.
So it does kind of start, then it basically voids that first time frame that you gave them, or it's amending it. It's saying,
So
okay,
that-
now you only have 3 days.
Well, so that's what kick out means, right?
Right.
So section 1 says, of A says that basically once I get another offer, I can kick out your contract
Okay.
in
Understood.
blank number of days. Okay. Now, section 3 explains what it means to satisfy the contingency, okay? Not just remove it, but satisfy it. So satisfy means deliver the seller a copy of the ratified contract with evidence that all contingencies other than financing and appraisal have been removed or waived by the deadline. So again, we come back up here, this number of days in A has to be enough that they can get on the market, get offers, ratify, and let the buyer of that property that's listed here do their due diligence and get through their contingencies other than finance and appraisal so that the contingency can be removed. So that's one option. Option two is that the contingency can be removed by delivering evidence to the seller that the purchase of this contract that you're in right now is not contingent on the sale of that other home. So the lender would have to update their lender letter saying that the buyer can get to closing on this contract without proceeds from the sale or without selling the other home, or they would provide evidence that they have enough cash to get to closing without. They can't just decide, I'm going to take the risk. That's not an option in removing that contingency. Okay. Everybody with me so far?
Yeah,
The
a quick question, Shannon. So on the paragraph A1, so that, when does that day get put in there? So, or the number of days. So requiring this contingency to be removed or set aside pursuant to sub paragraph 3 below, not later than 9 p.m. blank days after delivery of notice of this contract. When does that get put in once a contract is received, a backup contract is received and ratified?
No, so everything in what we're doing right now is offer documents. So if
Right.
you want it to be enforceable as part of the contract, it has to be filled in prior to ratification.
Okay, so what typically would you see put in there, or is that something that the seller is going to dictate?
So I'm going to say it's something that's less than 7 days.
Okay.
I see 3, 5, 7. I don't generally see 1. I don't usually see more than 7. It's a negotiable term. And for it to be negotiable, it has to be reasonable. So, so you have to, think about that. What is it you're offering to the seller? What are you asking the seller to do, right? To make it a win-win.
Shannon, can you go over A2 again, please? I'm a little confused.
A2 just means the property's not yet on the market. So it means that they want to enter into this contract and be ratified for the purchase of the home they're moving to, but they haven't yet listed the home they're selling.
So, and how many days will we give them for that? At what you've seen, or does it?
Well, it depends. Are they ready? Or are they not ready? If I'm a seller, I would have preferred to see it already listed.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. If buyer satisfies the requirements of subparagraph 3 above, right? So they have removed the contingency somehow. Either they've shown that the buyer of the house they're selling can move forward and has removed all their contingencies, or they can move forward because the lender says they are not contingent on the home sale or they have cash. The contract remains contingent on the settlement only of the buyer's property. Okay, so that means that if they remove the home sale contingency, what they're calling sale is really having a ratified contract that looks like it can go to closing. The paragraph allows for settlement of that purchaser's property to still be a contingency. So if for some reason, right before closing, the house that your buyer is trying to sell falls through, your client is protected in this transaction for the new home that they're buying. All right, so it says that settlement cannot be delayed more than blank number of days after the settlement date that this contract has agreed to. I will say 1 or 0 is what goes here. Okay, 1 is probably reasonable. And what that means is that your settlement date can be automatically extended by 1 day without everybody having to sign an addendum to say we agree to whatever the future settlement date is. Anything after that 1 day, everyone has to sign an addendum agreeing to what that settlement date has been changed to.
Here's something that came along today.
Okay. Seller will or will not accept assignment of funds. Want to see if I can explain assignment of funds without confusing you even more? When there are coinciding settlements or settlements that are very close together in time, you know, today and tomorrow, or this morning and this afternoon, or very close together, they have given us the option for assignment of funds so that the cash, right, the money, does not have to be received in the title company's bank account in order to be considered closed. All right, we talked yesterday about how settlement is considered complete when all of the papers are signed and all of the funds are received, right? You guys remember that from yesterday? So what happens if your buyer, right, in this transaction is a seller in another transaction, and they're selling in the other transaction in the morning, okay? And that title company has all of the funds in the morning and everything is ready to go, okay? So let's say that is Universal Title in the morning, and they have everything ready to go in the morning, all of the funds, everything is great. They cannot send the funds to the next title company for this transaction that we're looking at now, where your client is now a purchaser, until they go on record with the courthouse. So they can't just send the money over, so it's now in Echo Title's bank account to consummate this transaction, okay? Universal Title has to put it on record first. So what this is saying is that Echo Title is trusting Universal Title, right? Because Universal Title is a very reputable company, and they're saying, yes, we're going to take the signature of the parties from transaction 1 at Universal Title, and Universal Title is saying that we are assigning these funds to you. We are not giving them to the seller. We are going to send them to you at Echo Title for now the purchaser. Okay, so they're just sending the money, but it's not going to be in the hands of Echo Title for their transaction. So what that allows is a couple of things. It allows for there not to be delays in waiting for transaction number 1 to go on record and funds to disperse, because the title company actually has 48 hours to disperse from when it goes on record. They never wait that long, right? But they have time by law. So that would further delay this transaction that we're in right now, making an offer on, if we couldn't just assign the funds, if they were waiting for the cash to actually be in their bank account. Did I confuse all of you? Or did I actually explain what assignment of funds means and you feel like you learned something in the first half hour?
I
Okay.
think I learned something in the first half hour. Just a question, this seems to be something that would be more likely in a buyer's market than a seller's market. Am I correct in that?
It happens in both, actually, and it's just because of the timing.
Okay.
in how the transactions line up with each other. I think as long as the title companies that are being used are ones that we're aware of and comfortable with and we know of, and we know that there are some that we're not familiar with, and there are some that we are, I think assignment of funds is a good thing. I also think that if there's a situation where a seller will not accept assignment of funds, that's a red flag that you have to make sure that you have your timing set up properly. You're likely going to need a rent back because you're going to need time for the funds to hit. And it still doesn't have to go to the seller of property A into their bank account and then into property B. It still can go from one directly to the other. That's okay. But you need time for the funds to hit. So you're going to need to work things out like rent backs or temporary housing and things like that. All right, if there is delays further than this, 1 day or whatever number of days is put in this blank, the buyer can declare the contract void. All right, so they're not going to be considered in default. If the property that they have been trying to sell in order to get to this purchase cannot go through, they can declare the contract void if they feel like they're not going to be able to get to the closing table. All right, questions on that part before I go to just the next one? So the next one is essentially exactly what we talked about up here. It's the settlement of the buyer's property. What this is for is if your buyer has already put their home on the market, they have already gotten a contract, they've already gotten through their due diligence, and now they're just waiting to get to the closing table. So this is, the paragraph is simply for the settlement of that property. Okay, it doesn't say anything different than what we just went over in that paragraph.
So would you
Okay.
stick with 1 day?
Yes.
I would still stick with 1 day. I would still stick with 1 day. I don't think it's fair to a seller to have it drag out without needing to have a conversation and agreement on when the new settlement date is going to be. Some sellers are in a situation where they can have it, go longer. Most are not. So I do think that 1 day is appropriate, and that requires us to have conversations and for everybody to be on the same page. Yes.
So by listing the number of days, that means that automatically, if it's delayed by 1 day, the seller already agrees upfront to do that without having the buyer go into default.
That's right. And another addendum does not have to be signed, right? So if closing was supposed to be yesterday and this said 1 day, then it automatically provides for the extension to today.
Thank you.
All right, option C, contingent on the seller purchasing another home. This is a tool for us in a seller's market. This is something that I don't think we're using enough. And my hope has been for the last 9 months, 10 months, year, however long, that if we used this contingency with potential sellers more universally, that we would be able to get more listings, right? Because we need more listings. We need to keep the market moving. This is the contingency that keeps your seller from being homeless when they get an offer on their home, okay? This is called the home of choice contingency. When you see it listed in the MLS and says seller needs home of choice contingency, that's what this is. So this contingency is backwards from the home sale, right? This says that the seller in this contract that we would be ratifying needs a certain period of time to go find another home, get ratified, and get through their due diligence. Okay. If for some reason they can't get to find a home in that period of time, then they can void the contract. So they're never going to be homeless. So what this is for buyers that can come in and they have time, right, to give a seller or to give the buyer seller a chance to go find a house. They're willing to wait. Okay.
What's normal for the number of days?
Depends on the market. There's no normal, right?
Range?
If they've already identified the property, then you could put 7, 14, 20. If it's a market like this and they want to buy a unicorn, I would 60, right? It depends on their situation.
Okay.
General, I'm going to encourage you not to put anything in here without speaking to me first, because you may be trying to write contract language that doesn't actually apply. So this is something that you would use this paragraph if you wanted to give the buyer or seller the right to void if something's triggered by a certain activity, a certain number of days, okay? Backup contract. So we talked about this in the kickout clause, right? Doesn't always have to be a kickout where a buyer is accepted as a backup. It could be just any situation. I had years ago, I actually had 3 backup offers on a property. And for various different reasons, we actually ended up with the 3rd contract as our primary that we went to closing with. So I'm glad that we had the multiple backup offer situation. Buyers can get funny sometimes. So what this says is that this contract is the first backup to another contract between the seller and blank as the buyer. So it has to specify who the buyer is that's in that contract. So if you were a second backup offer, then you would have listed here who the buyer is in backup number 1, not in the primary contract, but in backup number 1. Okay, it's whoever you're in line behind is who gets filled in. The timelines are measured from either date of ratification or the date that your contract for your client becomes primary. I think it should always be the date that your contract becomes primary. It also says settlement date will be blank days after this date becomes primary. So you have to put some date in the beginning of the contract, right? In your initial offer, you have to put some date. But this will supersede that date, and you don't have to go back and change anything in the main part of your contract. So this would be 30 days or 40 days or 21 days or whatever it is that you're negotiating. Okay.
You said someday for the backup, meaning the ratification day. You choose the day. When you mention when you do the other, when you have the backup, you have to choose a date
For settlement. When you're
settlement.
making.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. So if the primary first position offer ends up going to closing, this contract just automatically is void, right? The other key to this is that the buyer can void this contract at any time without penalty while they're in a backup position. So they can still be out looking at other homes. They just can't write on another home until they void this one. So if they find another home they like, then they would void this one, and then they could write on another home.
Shannon, I have one question.
Sure.
Yes. Just a week before settlement table, lender realized this property belongs to flood zoning area. So in this case, lender require they need a flood hazard insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So the MLS contract seller or listing agent didn't mention before this property belongs to the flood zone area. So now flood hazard insurance is expensive, like $800, $1,000 every year. So what should I do right now, this situation?
So this situation is not related at all to what we're talking about in the contract. But I will answer very briefly that flood zone is not a required disclosure for sellers. Okay, so we can talk about that situation more after class.
Okay.
And how to handle it. But flood zones are something that we talked about the other day. They're listed on the depot disclosure as not a required disclosure for sellers.
No, it just came yesterday, so that's why I'm asking this question.
Sure, we can talk about that after class.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Shannon,
Yes.
with this market right now, if let's say in the afternoon, client is on the backup offer and they are looking at another offer that they want to put the house that they want to put the offer on, do we have to wait for the confirmation that we are voiding the contract?
Well, so notice to void is unilateral, and we're going to go over notice to void in a little while. The challenge and the risk there is that you would be ratified on 2 properties, right? That you would have delivery of a ratified contract from your second offer that you wrote, and that this primary contract went away. And so then you are served notice at the same time that you're now the first contract and in primary position on this one. So that's why you have to void. You can't have 2 offers out there that could be ratified at the same time, unless your client is financially able to purchase both properties. Okay, it's a misrepresentation of your client's abilities if you have offers out there. That's just also, that's like why we can't write multiple offers for a client at the same time. They can't go out and see 3 homes and know that it's a crazy market and write offers on all 3 homes, because they might get accepted on all 3 homes. And that's on us and on the client.
Yeah, so we have to wait until to get the confirmation after voiding the backup offer and then the offer.
Well, there's no confirmation that you're receiving. Remember, it's a unilateral notice. It's just something being sent from your side to their side. So you just have to send it. It's just delivery of that notice. It's not confirmation they received it. It's delivery of that notice.
Thank you.
Shannon, how do you accept multiple backups? Do you use the same addendum for the backup and you just write a backup to a backup? How do you do that?
So up here, it's between this, it's the name that goes here is going to be whoever's in front of you.
Gotcha. So when it says this contract is a first backup to another contract, then you would put the name of the first backup. Correct.
Right. So let's say Anya, let's say you're the buyer in the primary contract. Okay. And Bill wants to buy the property too. And Wes wants to buy it also. What would happen here is that your contract's ratified and Bill comes in with an offer and Bill says, I'll be a backup. So this would be filled out on Bill's document to say that Bill is the first backup to the contract between the seller and Anya Kress. Okay. And then when Wes comes in and says, but I want to buy it, I'll be a backup to 2. Then Wes's contract would say it's the first backup between the seller and William Armstrong. Right?
I see.
Okay. Because Wes is the backup to Bill. Bill is the backup to you. Okay. So it's listing who they are behind, who the buyer is that they are behind.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. As is property condition. This is one section that can address HOA violations as not a requirement for the seller to comply with. This is the only place that you can address that because of the way the statute is written. Okay, this paragraph is used for short sales, because if a short sale seller has no money to pay their mortgage, they do not have money to pay for repairs. They do not have money to pay for HOA violations. They do not have money to pay for these other such things. So what you can do here is you can check the boxes that are being deleted or amended from the main part of the contract. So all clauses pertaining to delivery of the property free and clear of trash and debris. So some investors will say, just take what you want and leave the rest and we'll deal with it, right? That happens on tear downs sometimes, where the investors are like, it's fine, right? We'll deal with it. Or a seller's in a situation where they just can't get everything out. Compliance with laws and regulations regarding smoke detectors. Again, if the buyer just understands that the seller doesn't have any money to do anything and to replace the smoke detectors or check them, whatever, you can mark this and say everybody's in agreement that that smoke detector paragraph doesn't apply. The termite inspection, this line had been in here for as long as I can remember, where you could remove the termite paragraph. One of our recent iterations of the sales contract actually added the box for none, right? It says none, buyer at buyer's expense or seller at seller's expense. So this is kind of redundant, because if you say none, then that paragraph doesn't apply in the contract, right? So this might be a technical update that we have this year. All clauses pertaining to seller's compliance with orders of violation from the county or local authority. Okay, so this and the next one, the property owners or condos association violation, both of these are covered in that title paragraph that we went over yesterday, that says that these are things that the seller must comply with or the buyer can void. These are also things that if the seller has been provided written notice of these violations, it has to be disclosed to the purchaser. So if the seller has received a notice from the county saying, we are aware that you do not have a permit for whatever work you did, and they've received the notice from the county, that has to be disclosed to the buyers. Now that's different from the seller just knowing that they didn't get permits, right? Those are two different things.
So, sorry, Shannon, one question. So if you choose to don't flag this to the last two section, what does it mean? That I don't, that the seller doesn't need to disclose?
The seller doesn't need to disclose what?
So the last two section as is, right? So if me as a buyer, I choose to don't flag the last two paragraph,
So,
what does it mean?
It means that the seller doesn't have to fix anything if you check those boxes.
Okay.
They still have to disclose. This doesn't say they don't have to disclose. This says they don't have to fix it if you check those boxes.
Okay, so about the HOA, if they have any type of violation. So if I don't track the last two, what does it mean? That the seller still is he need to, if there's any type of violation with the HOA, he still need to fix, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, most contracts do not have the contingencies and clauses addendum, and if the contingencies and this addendum is used, you're not using the as-is property condition paragraph anyway.
Okay.
Right? This is for unique circumstances that you would use this paragraph.
Okay, great. Thank you.
The next section is the unrepresented seller or builder and buyer's broker. This is the one time that you're allowed to negotiate negotiate is not the right word. This is the one time that you are allowed to address commission in the sales contract. Commission is not negotiable in the sales contract, and there is no place for it in the sales contract if there is a realtor representative on both sides of the transaction. This is simply for a case where there is not a realtor representative on the listing side of the transaction. So this is some type of FSBO situation, okay? So we went over the one-time showing authorization document earlier this week. I think that was Monday. Feels like a month ago by now. On that document, when you're showing the home, you have negotiated the commission and what's going to be paid on that document. You are then taking that information and putting it here onto the sales contract. What this does is it allows the title company to then add a line item on the settlement statement for that fee that was negotiated so that it's paid right from the seller's proceeds. So it becomes part of the contract. The reason that we can address the commission here with a FSBO is because the commission is directly being paid by the seller, right? And the seller is a party to the contract. Remember, when it's someone who's represented on both sides, the commission technically is being paid to the buyer's agent by the listing brokerage, and the brokerages are not a party to the contract. Okay, so I just want to clarify that. The next two sections are for 1031 exchanges. We had a class on 1031 exchanges a few weeks ago with Bill Horan. It was recorded. If you did not attend that class, I encourage you to go back and attend that class. Bill is excellent. You do not need to know a lot about 1031 exchanges in your business outside of what he teaches you in that class. The idea of a 1031 exchange is it's a like-kind exchange. So you're selling one property, right? Client selling one property, and they're going to take the proceeds and they're going to go buy another property that's similar, okay? And it has to meet certain criteria. The key to that is that the client can never have possession of the funds. So when they sell property one, the money can never go into their bank account and then go purchase something else. That then negates the exchange portion of it. The reason that it's noted in here as a 1031 exchange is because there are certain very specific criteria and certain companies that help as the intermediary, right? That's who holds the money, right, on behalf of the client, because they don't have to go to closing immediately. They have time in between the transactions. It needs to be noted in here that the money is going somewhere, and there's additional disclosures that have to be signed by the parties. It doesn't hurt anything. It's not anything that is going to adversely affect a seller if the buyer is doing a 1031 exchange or vice versa to sign documents. It's just simply a disclosure piece.
Shannon,
Yes.
I'm working with a client now that's going to be doing a 1031 exchange. When you say like-kind property, is it down to the point where if they sold a single-family home and then they want to buy a townhouse, is that considered not like-kind?
Well, it could be, and I would encourage you to have your client talk to Bill Horan's office.
Okay.
Because they're going to be able to narrow down what the criteria is. Because a townhouse is considered a single family dwelling, right? Because one family can live in it. It's not a multifamily dwelling. And so there can be some opportunity there depending on the size and price.
Okay. Can I talk to you offline afterwards? There's some extra things I need to talk about there.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, real estate co-ops. There are very few co-ops in Virginia. Co-ops are under the same act as HOAs and condos as far as some of the disclosures and things that need to take place. However, there are additional disclosures because in a co-op, you're buying into ownership of the corporation. You're not buying into ownership of the physical property itself. So there are different types of disclosures that are required, and there are actually only certain title companies in the area that are handling settlements right now for co-ops. So if you have a co-op that you're going to be dealing with, reach out to me. The number of days is different than what we're used to also on those disclosure statements. So keep that in mind. If it's a co-op, you're going to need this. Okay, that's contingencies and clauses addendum. Everybody good with that before we move on to our friend, the escalation addendum? Okay. Excellent.
I was going to ask about backup offer again. Excuse me. Could you clarify it with accepting one or multiple backup offers? Do you negotiate each backup offer terms individually?
Yeah, so each contract, each offer becomes a contract. Each offer becomes a ratified contract. So whatever has been negotiated up front and accepted as that backup is a ratified contract in whatever the terms were that were negotiated before everyone signs. So in order to be a backup, everybody has to sign. Everyone has to agree to all the terms.
Right, but do you disclose at that point that, you know, the first offer, the one that's, you know, the primary offer is such, so the seller is looking for whatever, or or you backing up, you know, you're accepting the backup offer independently of what that primary offer is. You just negotiating a separately the best possible.
That's up to you and your client. I mean, if you're, I guess in practice, if you're telling the backups what the first offer is and the first offer hasn't been ratified, then what's to say that the backups aren't going to come and try to beat it to then be in the primary position?
Well, it's more so like if you accepted a first offer, right, and you ratified it, and then a day or two later, another buyer came in, or you had multiple offers, and you told them, you know, unfortunately, someone else won the bidding war, and they said, well, I want to be a backup. Do you at that point negotiate their best term, right? Because let's say you accepted a $600,000 offer.
They have to negotiate something that they're willing to accept.
Right. So the seller doesn't have to accept it unless they got either close to the terms or the same terms.
They don't have to accept anything at all.
Right.
Right. So whatever they are comfortable with accepting is what they accept.
But in that point, is it allowed to disclose that the primary offer was such, so the seller's looking?
You can only disclose what your seller tells you can disclose.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, escalation addendums. So the caveat that I want to give you when we start with the escalation addendum is that the escalation addendum only applies if your client wins on price and the other terms don't change in the contract. So if you're a listing agent and you're receiving offers with escalation addendums, and offer number one has the highest price, but has lots of contingencies, and offer number two has a lower price and no contingencies, and you want to go with offer number two, even though their net price is going to be lower, the escalation clause does not apply any longer. The escalation clause simply applies if the rest of the contract terms are accepted and the price escalates based off of what this document says. All right, so I want to start there. The escalation addendum says that the buyer is willing to pay X amount above anyone else's net offer to the seller not to exceed a maximum sales price of blank. That's what it says right here in this whole paragraph, okay? The net sale price is the sale price on page 1 minus any other concessions and credits. So that would be minus seller subsidy. That would be minus home warranty. That would be minus termite inspection. Anything else, anything that the seller has to pay for on behalf of the buyer goes into the net sale price. So in an example, we might say that the buyer is willing to pay an amount of $1,000 right here above anyone else's offer, anyone else's net offer, but we're not going to exceed $400,000. On page 1 of the contract, we may have said $350,000 was our starting point. And we will beat other offers by $1,000 increments up to $400,000, okay? The next section says, with those increases, we're either retaining our appraisal contingency or we're waiving our appraisal contingency. FHA and VA financing cannot waive their appraisal contingency, so you can't even check the box that says waives appraisal contingency. So how do you get to the escalated sale price? What you need to know is that offers with escalation clauses that are competing against each other will escalate off of each other. So it's not based off of the price on page 1, it's based on the highest price that that buyer is willing to pay in how you come up with that final price. So in this scenario, we said our buyer started at $350. They're going to offer $1,000 above anyone else's offer, not to exceed $400,000. Okay. Buyer that we're competing with started at $360. And let's say they have the same escalator of $1,000. And they're willing to go up to $375. All right. So now our client is competing with $375. If they were to win, they would win at $376. Because they said they would beat any other offer by $1,000. And it's $376 is what the other offer was, okay? Now, let's change the scenario for a minute. Let's say our offer that goes to 400 has all of the contingencies in place. And offer number 2 that goes to 375 waived all of their contingencies. So really the seller says that dollar amount isn't anything because it's never going to appraise. So let's go with the 375 guy. This box in the middle does not get filled in because they didn't win based on price. They won based on the total picture. Okay, so how do you handle that? Well, I would say that you take the 400 offer guy and you send that as proof, as it says right here. If you were using this addendum, the seller shall provide the purchaser a complete copy of the other offer used to justify the escalated sale price. So in good faith, you provide that 400 offer and you say, okay, 375 guy, we like your terms better, but we have a higher price. If you'll come up to 375, then we'll go with you. 375 guy says, of course. You go back to page 1 of the sales contract and you change the sale price to 375 and you have everyone initial. And then you go to page 12 where it lists all of the attachments to the contract and you say no escalation addendum and you take this document out. So now you simply have countered at the price, and in good faith, you have provided the justification. But if your client had decided to take the 400 guy, right, with all of their contingencies, they would have won at 376, and you would have filled in everything right here in this box, and the complete copy of the 375 offer has to accompany your ratified contract in order to make it complete, because you have to justify where the price came from if you are using this box.
Shannon, can I ask a question?
Yes.
So are you saying that if this was the scenario with accepting a lower sales price with better terms,
Yes.
are you saying that we have the ability to show the other offer that's 400, that's higher, prior to ratifying to the lower offer, where we can show him that?
I think you
upfront?
should.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you should, because you're escalating their price. You're asking them to escalate to their top price. And while an escalation addendum, when we're looking at it from a buyer's perspective, the buyer is showing their cards, right? We have to tell our buyers that, hey, listen, you have told the seller everything you're willing to do, right? Right here. So that the risk is that you have no competing offers and the seller just comes back and says, I know you really want this house, I'm going to counter you.
Okay.
So I think that in good faith, because of the market we're in, and just because we want to stay friends with our colleagues and co-brokers, we show why our seller is asking them to escalate.
And then would you show them the lower offer? Would you show them just this page that it's actually truly escalating up to 400, or would you show them the whole contract?
It doesn't matter. I mean,
Okay.
I think you can show them the whole contract, because if they had won the escalation, you'd have to show them someone else's whole contract.
Okay.
So I think it's okay.
Thank you.
If there are no other changes that need to be made in the contract, no corrections or, clerical items, this box can be filled in. And when your seller signs everything else, this automatically becomes part of the contract and it's ratified. All right. So just be aware when your buyers are making offers with escalation addendums that they're showing their cards. This is something that I would also say you might want to have the discussion and have the buyer's acknowledgement of potential adverse consequences signed if they're using an escalation addendum, because it's so important to know that a seller can just simply send a counter and they don't have to justify where that price came in. They can choose to, but they don't have to. So it's a risk. And I don't like when the buyers get upset and they're like, oh, we thought they had to show it to us, and they don't. They don't have to. All right, post-settlement occupancy agreement. This document is what we lovingly refer to as the rent back agreement. The ironic piece of that, though, is that it's not rent at all. It's not a landlord-tenant relationship at all. It is simply a holdover occupancy. And it is a confusion that a lot of clients have. So I'm going to tell you about post-settlement occupancy, and then I'll hit the points of the document for you. Post-settlement occupancy means that the seller cannot move out on the date of closing. They need a few extra days or a month before their new place is ready. And the buyer is saying, I have flexibility. Let's get to closing because you need your money. I want my rate lock, and it makes everything stronger in our offer for you to have your money and get to closing. The contract itself, right, talks about condition. And it says that on the date of settlement, that the property should be delivered in substantially the same condition as of whatever box was checked in paragraph 10, right? Date of offer, date of home inspection, whatever, unless otherwise agreed to in writing. Otherwise agreed to in writing means there might have been home inspection items or something, right, that needed to be fixed prior to closing. Buyers need to do walkthroughs, even though the seller is still living there. They need to do a walkthrough. Because after settlement, you have another condition and occupancy deadline when it comes to post-settlement occupancy agreement. And what this talks about is that the property must be delivered at the end of the occupancy deadline in substantially the same condition as of the date of closing. So if your buyer is offering a rent back and chooses not to do a walkthrough, they have no way to prove what the condition was when they go to do their walkthrough when the seller moves out. Also, if the seller goes to closing and the HVAC works and they have a 30-day rent back period, and on day 15, the HVAC stops working, the seller is responsible to fix it. They do not call the buyer as if the buyer was their landlord and say, you're the new owner, sorry, your HVAC doesn't work, I need you to fix it. Or there's a leak in the roof, or, you know, something happened and you need to fix it, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. It's the seller's responsibility. And this is something that a lot of sellers don't understand when they do this. This is not a lease. The buyer is not their landlord, okay?
There is a place where it says that.
Yeah, it does. We'll get there. I'll point it out, but it does. I don't make this stuff up, Giovanna.
No. I know. I just wanna, you know how they are. They wanna prove. They want you to show that this is the contract, and I wanna be, you know, be aware about what it is.
Yep. It's in the maintenance and condition paragraph. So what paragraph 1 says is what are we charging the seller? What's the buyer charging the seller? In this market, a lot of buyers are offering a free rent back, right? It makes their offer stronger. If it's within the same month, there's no out-of-pocket expense to the buyer because they're still paying their same closing costs regardless. Okay, so it makes their offer stronger. If you go to closing on January 15th, your first mortgage payment is March 1st. Okay, so from a cash flow standpoint, it doesn't hurt the buyers, and it can make their offer stronger to be giving the free rent back. So the choices are a flat fee per day. It can be a flat fee total, right? And this is where you would, if you were doing it for free, you would put 0, right? A flat fee of 0. Or the total of the buyer's expenses for all of these things listed, taxes, insurance, mortgage, HOA, whatever, prorated. And the title company calculates that. So it's basically a per diem of what the buyer's costs are for each day that the seller is simply reimbursing them for. Okay, in whatever a normal market is, right? But in a more even market, you're going to see this box checked, where the seller simply pays the buyer's costs. It's not meant to be a profit center for the buyers. It's generally just covering their costs. But to make an offer stronger, we're seeing a lot right now of the flat fee of 0. And I think it's a good idea. I think it's just one of those things, right? That just, it's not all about the sale price. This right here is just the disclosure that it's not, this is not governed under the VRLTA, it's not a lease. Okay, so this is one of the places where it tells them, Giovanna. Occupancy deadline. So this is where it says when they have to move out. They have to be out by 9 p.m. on whatever day. Post-settlement occupancies cannot be longer than 60 days. Okay, the buyers are signing an affidavit at closing if they are getting a loan that says this is going to be their primary residence, that says they plan to occupy this as their primary residence within 60 days. So then if you have a post-settlement occupancy that's longer than 60 days, then that doesn't work. Okay, so they cannot be longer than 60 days. Then it says, will you, as the buyer, refund any unused portion of the occupancy charge? Or is it just you get all of it no matter when they move out? So let's say it was a situation where the seller was covering the daily expenses and it was for the full 60 days. Okay, all of that gets credited from the seller's proceeds to the buyer at closing. It's not paid each month. It's not paid each week. It's paid as a lump sum, as a credit to the buyer at closing. So what this is saying is that if the buyer decides, if the seller decides that they don't need to stay the full 60 days and they only need to stay for 30, is the buyer going to give them back the money from the extra 30 days? And that's where you would check yes or no. That's up to your buyer, right? When you're offering this, will they or won't they, depending on what the situation is that has been discussed.
Question.
Yes.
Let's say that we, as my buyer, accept to give them 60 days free.
Mm-hmm.
The first month, as a buyer, is not gonna pay so the mortgage, but he's
Mm-hmm.
gonna pay the second month. So it's gonna still, his responsibility is to pay. So this is like adding more benefits to the seller in the offer, right?
This does add more benefits to the seller on the offer, and it's for 60, depending on what day of the month they're closing, it depends on when the out-of-pocket expense occurs, right? So if you're going to closing on the 3rd of February, 60 days is going to be what, the 2nd of April? Well, the mortgage payment is the 1st of April.
Yeah.
So there's really not much time, right, where it's out of pocket and out of the house. But if the closing is at the 20th of February, right, then it will be. And so it just depends. It just depends on the situation.
Thank you.
Sure. The next section 2B says default. So if the seller doesn't vacate when they're supposed to, then the seller shall pay double the daily occupancy charge listed up top or blank per day. Well, if you've given them a free rent back, then you need to put some dollar amount in here in case they don't move out for what they would have to pay. I would say it depends on what the size of the house is, what the daily expenses are of your client. So you can calculate what their per diem is, right? Or just come up with a flat fee number, put $200 a day, right? $150 a day, whatever it is. Giovanna, this is the paragraph that you were asking for about where does it say that the seller has to take care of everything? It's this one right here. Seller shall maintain and repair property, including electrical, plumbing, appliances, heating, air conditioning, et cetera, in substantially the same condition as of the date of settlement. Except as otherwise agreed to in writing, seller will deliver the property in substantially the same physical condition as on settlement and in room clean condition with free of trash and debris. So that's your paragraph. Security deposit. So this is not meant to be a huge amount of money. This is meant to be an amount of money that is held in escrow by the title company in case the tenant, security deposit equals tenant in my mind, in case the seller does not move out when they're supposed to, or there is damage. So I'm thinking, depending on the size of the house and how long the rent back is, this is something between like $1,000 and $2,500. This is not something that is to be a substantial amount of money.
Shannon, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Because it happened to me. So the security deposit has to be held by, in this case, it's the title company, the escrow agent of the listing agent, right?
No, it's usually the buyer's title company that holds it. So if it's a split settlement, it's the buyer's title company. It's whoever's listed in. Remember, the buyer is sending this, right, in their offer. So it's the buyer's title company that's holding it.
Buyer, okay.
Yeah, and remember, when you guys do split settlements, it's the buyer's title company that's actually handling all of the money. The buyer's title company is actually doing the transaction. The seller's title company is simply communicating with the seller and communicating with the buyer's title company. They're not actually consummating the transaction for you. It's the buyer's title company that's doing it. And the buyer's title company has all the money.
But it's the seller, in this case, that he wrote the security deposit, right? So in this case, it's not his title company.
No one wrote the security deposit. It was held from the proceeds. And all the money is at the buyer's title company, remember.
Okay. Directly, okay, great.
Okay. Utilities, so the seller keeps the utilities in their name until the occupancy deadline, or, you know, if it's agreed that they're moving out early, right, then the buyer would put it in their name. Risk of loss. So this paragraph is important because the seller no longer owns the home, right? So their homeowner's insurance is going to be different. They're going to have to change their insurance policy. The buyer has the regular homeowner's insurance policy now, and the seller has to change to that renter's type policy while they're owning the home, or while they're living in the home after they don't own it anymore. And then access to the property. The buyer gets a key to the property at settlement. They own the property now. If the buyer needs access for something, the seller will provide reasonable access. The buyer doesn't just get to come in every day and say, I need to measure for blinds, I need to measure for new carpet, I need to bring the painter in to give me an estimate, these types of things. That's not what it's for. If the property is going to be offered for rent, the buyer and buyer's agent can show the property during reasonable hours for 30 days prior to the end of this agreement. So if it's an investor that bought the property and you have a 60-day rent back and the investor wants to put it on the market for rent, the holdover seller has to allow showings during those last 30 days, is what's clarified in that access paragraph. All right, and then the last addendum that we have here is just the Ferpa addendum I included for you guys, so that if your client is considered a foreign person for Ferpa purposes, this is the additional that has to be signed and included with the contract, so that everyone under the buyer is required to withhold 15% of the sale price on behalf of the seller if the transfer exceeds $1 million, and if it is $1 million or less, then it is 10% of the sale price, right? And remember, it's the buyer's responsibility, even though it's the seller's tax, right? And and that there are exemptions, but it's the additional disclosure that has to be made part of the contract. Okay, and that's it for us finishing yesterday. I would like to give you guys a break before we get into the post-ratification materials. It is 10:21, well, 10:22 now. So let's just take 5 minutes or so and stretch, bathroom, and then we'll knock out the post-ratification documents. Okay, see you guys back at 10:27.
Sean, can I ask a question?
Sure.
About the delivering of the house in the broom clean condition. Does it also apply to the outside territory, let's say backyard, front yard?
It does apply to the yard as well.
Okay.
So no trash and debris left in the yard is what it means.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Shannon, I had a quick question. On the one-page broker information sheet, there's no actual office number listed for the Kingstown office. Is there one you want us using?
The office number for Kingstown is 703 562 1800.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. And thank you for letting me know. I will update that. All right, everybody, 10:29. So let's get started. We're going to do the day 5 materials, which I hope are the easiest of the whole week for you guys. I hope that we're going to end a little bit easier than what we have started with. So I am going to share my screen and get you guys into that material. Try to share my screen. There we go. I think it's shared now. You guys see it?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Post ratification document. So where we are now is in the process where we would have a ratified contract. Okay, so we went over all of the documents that could be most used when making an offer and getting to ratification. Now we have documents that could be used or would be used after the contract is ratified. So one of the key components to a ratified contract is you never change it. Once it's ratified and signed and initialed by everyone and delivered and has the ratification date, you do not ever go back to that document, that physical document, to make changes. You simply use sales contract addendums or notices or one of these other documents to make changes or corrections or clarifications. As soon as you go back to a document that's been ratified and completed, you then unratify the document, and we don't ever want to do that. So the first document I want to show you guys is the Addendum Sale. In your rental package, you saw one that said Addendum-Lease. This is simply a document to add terms, clarification, corrections to your residential sales contract. If you have to make a correction or addition or clarification to a lease, you would use the document that says Addendum-Lease that was in your packet from Wednesday. An addendum is something that the parties have to agree to. So buyers and sellers must sign. So this is something that would be a term that's being agreed to. So a closing date change. You know, buyer and seller agree that closing date is now, you know, January 25th, 2021. This would be where you would correct names if they are not right on the contract, and then corrected or clarified or additionally addressed goes here, and all parties sign. The notice document is used for unilateral communication. So this is something that is not a negotiable item in the contract. This is not something that requires parties to agree. This is something where there is a requirement that one party tells another party formally about something, okay? So this is the document that would be used if the buyer is changing their title company, right? Because it's not negotiable. So it's simply one-sided communication. You will most often use an addendum. Most of the things that need to be changed or clarified or communicated are actually things that need to be agreed to by all parties and not served by this blank notice. All right, inspection contingency removal addendum. This is the document that you use in conjunction with your home inspection wish list, a radon contingency wish list, well and septic, other inspection that you may have negotiated. This is the inspection contingency removal addendum. And what it says is that the buyer agrees to remove their contingency if the following repairs are made. And here's their wish list. This is the document that we talked about yesterday that triggers the negotiation period in the home inspection contingency addendum. So as soon as this is delivered to the seller side with the full copy of the report for the inspections, it triggers your negotiation period. And then you have whatever number of days to negotiate what's on this list. I'm going to be very candid. This space right here is not large for a reason. This is not the place where you list every deficiency that is found on the home inspection. This is where you list the items that are the most important deal breaker items to your buyer and fall into the category of safety issues, systems that do not work, that were advertised to be working, or something that could cause damage to the home while the homeowner still owns it, right? The leaks are the example that we give there. That is what goes here. If for some reason you need more space, you would complete your first document, you would call it addendum number 1. You would reference down here that this is in conjunction with addendum number 2, and you would call it number 2, and you would continue on another one of these documents. But I encourage you to have the conversation with your clients up front when they are doing their home inspection. Have them look at this document and show them, right? There's a small space given to us for a reason. On this document, if you're requesting wish list repairs, you have to be very clear. An independent third party who has no knowledge of anything in this transaction has to understand what repairs are being requested and what the expectation is as far as the remedy. So simply copying from the home inspection report saying the dishwasher is not functioning properly, have evaluated, repair or replace, right? That doesn't, that's not very detailed, right? You have to make it very clear what it is that your client is looking for. So do they want it repaired? Do they want something replaced? If it needs further evaluation, and you say, have evaluated, right? Have such and such evaluated. That's great. They can get, the seller can say, sure, I'll have it evaluated, right? And then they don't have to do any repairs because it never said anything about repairs to be done based on the evaluation. I see a lot of confusion with clean and service the HVAC system. We talk about this regularly. Well, what does clean and service mean? The buyer thinks that when the company comes to clean and service the HVAC and they give a list of all the things that need to be done, regarding the service, the buyer thinks that everything on that list will be done. And the seller thinks, okay, well, what absolutely has to be done right now? And that's what I'm going to do, right? So there's a discrepancy. There's a disconnect in what the expectations are. So make it very clear. If your client is picky and wants to be able to determine who the vendors are and how it's done, and you just think that it's going to be a disaster if you send a list of things for the seller and that the buyer's going to not be happy, ask for money. If they haven't already asked for a seller subsidy and there's room from the lender, ask for money. In which case you would need this document, because in order to remove the contingency, right, they have to agree to give money. And then you would go up here to the sales contract addendum and you would prepare the sales contract addendum that says that the seller subsidy is now blank. So if they were already giving $2,000 and you're asking for $3,000 on the home inspection, your seller subsidy is now $5,000. This is the document that goes to the lender. We don't ever send anything to the lender that has to do with inspections or repairs or anything like that. Simply money is what we send to the lender. So you would need those two documents if you're asking for money.
I have a question.
Yes.
This is Mary Jean. I don't know if I'm remembering incorrectly, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But earlier in the week, I believe you said something about the contract, like if you wanted the house painted, or that's the way I understood it, or maybe a hole in the wall fixed. That was where a request should be made in the first place, rather than waiting to negotiate all the way over again when you get to the home inspection.
So we shouldn't be negotiating for the home to be put in a condition that it was not advertised to be in any situation.
Okay.
So if you're showing a home and it needs to be painted, that's not really something that should ever be negotiated, to have the home painted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they've said we're selling the home and it's an as-is condition without the home being painted. So it really wouldn't go on here and it wouldn't go in your offer documents. This is to fix discrepancies and deficiencies based on how the home was advertised to be in a certain condition when the client made the offer. Now, the problem with the contingency, though, is the buyer can go outside of what they've agreed to in the contract and say, I want a Mickey Mouse mural painted on the wall in my kid's bedroom, and write it on here. And if the seller says no, then the buyer can void. So there is that outside area where buyers do get a little frivolous, and it's our job to set the expectations with them on what they're supposed to be asking for here.
Very clear. Thank you.
Thanks.
Shannon, can I ask a question on the home inspection? When asking for money, is it appropriate to use the verbiage of in lieu of repairs, buyer asking for whatever credit in X amount? And then do you need
on this document? Yes. On the inspection contingency addendum, yes. Not on the sales contract addendum that would go to the lender.
Yep, I get that. Oh, my actual question is, do we need to list the items that we're asking for credit for? Let's say, we found out the windows are not working, like whatever the case is, right? Do we need to list what those items are so the seller has an understanding, like, okay, they're not just asking for random credit, they're telling us what they wanted to repair and what the money will be for?
So you don't have to, and you've had to provide the entire copy of the report with this document anyway, so they know everything that's wrong, right? So you don't have to itemize where the number's coming from because they have the list of everything already. You can itemize, but it's not necessary because they have the whole report.
Could you instead do, specify an issue that, you know, buyer wants whatever repaired or credit of, and then put the amount?
You can. So here's what you risk, is that the seller just signs the document. So then what? Right? Who decides when, which of those choices occurs?
Okay.
Right? So I would say that you could pick what.
I got that.
Pick what it is, yeah, and then communicate with the listing agent and say, you know, this is what they really need to have taken care of. And if your client can't, they would be willing to accept a credit in the amount of if you would like to counter.
Got it.
Right, and that way it's clear what's going to be accepted, and then they could counter, or they could just accept that they're going to do the repair.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, the word "or" stresses me out in contracts. Okay, this also goes on to say that unless otherwise specified, all repairs should be performed by a licensed contractor who's licensed to do the type of work specified, and receipts or other written evidence that the repairs have been completed will be provided prior to or at the buyer's final walkthrough inspection of the property. So we talked about this earlier with the condition and those and the access to the property, where if your buyer wants to do a walkthrough a week in advance to double check on these things, you need to communicate that to the seller to make sure that they are finished with all of these items, because you don't want to force them into a breach of a contract term. This also says that everything on here needs to be done by a licensed contractor with receipts provided, unless it's agreed to that it's not. So, for example, there might be a couple of minor things, right? Maybe there's nothing major, but the buyer is not very handy and is very nervous about a couple of things. And they would like to have the bathtub recaulked in one of the bathrooms. And there are screens that are in the storage room in the basement that they want installed on the windows, okay? So they could write on here that they want the bathroom tub recaulked and the screens installed. If they don't specify that the seller can do these without licensed contractor, then the seller would have to hire someone to come and do those items. In many cases, a homeowner is able to install screens and caulk a bathtub, right? Not all cases, but in many cases. So be aware when you're asking as well, because there also could be something that a buyer is, as you know, your buyer's asking for maybe 3 or 4 things, but the 1 or 2 of them are minor. Indicate that on your wish list. It might go further, right? You might have more a shot at getting all 4 things taken care of if it says that the seller can take care of 1 or 2 items without having a licensed contractor take care of those. Okay.
Question, Shannon.
Yes.
And on this one, it's not enough. Of course, I always, said that I want to be, I would have to be done by a professional contractor, but it's not enough here, and unless otherwise specified above, all repairs are to be performed by a contract license to the type of work required.
Jiva, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, here you said that we have to, that sometimes sellers can use either use a professional, a licensed contractor, or maybe, a handyman. And we have kind of specified what we want, right? In the wish list.
Well, no, so on the wish list, it's automatic that it has to be a licensed contractor.
Okay. Yeah, is what I, yeah.
Unless you specify that it doesn't have to be.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Shannon, question.
Mhm.
So let's say the buyer says that, okay, fix this, this, and this. And I, as a seller, can say, look, I don't need a contractor because I can replace, let's say, a receptacle myself.
Mhm.
Do I make an amendment to this and say that this and this and this will be, this work will be done by the seller himself?
Yes, so it would be a counter offer on this. So you would add the language that says, you know, items 1, 2, and 3 to be completed by seller without licensed contractor, and receipts do not need to be provided, right?
Okay.
And then everybody initials that so that it's very clear. You know, there might be 4 things and 3 things you could take care of, and 1 thing you really do need a contractor for, right? Like maybe that 4th thing has to do with, you know, something on the HVAC system, or, you know, whatever, where you're not qualified for that. You have to have a licensed contractor, but you could take care of the other items. So you can just specify.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. This document, real quick, is just the extension of the review period for the HOA and condo docs. So this is what you would use. Again, there's an option for you to use it with the offer. In most cases, you're not going to know that you need it until after the documents are received, because there's something in it that triggers additional information gathering. So this is what you would use for that. Okay, and you just have to fill in the blank that says how many days extra you're extending, and it's 4 is the maximum. Okay. Appraisal contingency notice. Okay, did you guys have so much fun yesterday talking about financing contingencies? I hope you guys learned something from that yesterday. This right here is the document that's used for the appraisal contingency when it's being removed or when the appraisal needs to be negotiated. Okay, so what this says is that there are 5 choices in what happens with the appraisal, and this is similar to the verbiage that's in those appraisal contingencies addendums. So what it says is that the buyer, right, it's a notice. So this is unilateral. This is the buyer sending a note to the seller saying something in this document applies, and they check the box on what applies. There's something they want to tell the seller, okay, unilateral. It says that either the appraisal is equal to or greater than the sale price and the contingency is being removed. Great. Phew, right? Everybody can breathe. The second one says the buyer elects to proceed with this contract without regard to the appraisal and the contingency has been removed. Okay, seller says, phew, although does the buyer really have the money to get to closing if the appraisal comes in low? Okay, but it's still, all right, number 1's the best, number 2 is okay, right? Number 3, the appraisal is equal to or greater than the sale price. However, the buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of this contract because the property does not satisfy the lender requirements, the appraisal does not allow for the specified financing, or the property is inadequate collateral. So this has something to do with the condition of the home or the type of home with regard to what has been applied for with the mortgage. So the value came in, but there's something with the condition or the type of home that they don't allow this type of financing.
You have to have a proof of that, like a written, always you have, there's nothing like it just, I'm gonna be out, or you have
Right.
to.
You have to, right, it says, please see attached written statement and written denial of financing showing evidence of the lender's decision. So you have to have proof.
Shannon, can you give an example of like what would happen? Like like that situation where
Yes, yes.
it's this far into the process and now the lender is saying no.
Yep. So there could be a situation where there were lender required repairs that neither party was willing to make or had the ability to make. So then the condition was not such that they could move forward with it. There was a situation recently that one of our agents had as listing agent, the property's under contract, and it was USDA financing. And the lender decided somehow that the property was a mobile home, and it's not. It's a manufactured home. It is not mobile. It has never had a VIN number. It has never been a mobile home. It didn't actually even say anything on the appraisal about it being a mobile home, but there was something in it that caused them to decline the collateral. The value came in, but the lender declined the type of property. So that is a situation where they can't move forward because the lender declined the USDA financing. So luckily in that case, they were able to switch and they're doing VHDA financing. Instead of trying to fight it through USDA, it's just faster to switch the loan type. So they didn't actually have to declare the contract void. They could have, but they were able to work out an extension and change the financing contingency. So those are two examples.
Thank you.
Number 4, the appraisal is less than the sale price, and the buyer elects to negotiate a mutually acceptable new sales price. Buyer's proposed sale price is blank. Okay, so here, this is where a new sale price is negotiated or confirmed, right? So if you've negotiated up front that the buyer's willing to pay $10,000 above the low appraised value, it still has to be memorialized somewhere that the appraised value came in low, and here's our new sale price. So if your initial contract was at $450 and your client said they'll pay $10,000 above the appraised value and it came in at $430, this is where you would put $440, okay, as the new proposed sale price of $440.
If the sale price remains the same, do you just repeat it here? Like they're just going to bring it up to what the sales price, if the sales price is $450, it's appraised at $440, they're going to pay the extra 10, so it's still $450?
No, you would use, if you're not changing the sale price at all, you would use option 2.
No, okay.
Which is buyer elects to proceed without regard to the appraisal, because the price has not changed.
Understood.
This all, option 4 says that you still have to provide the written statement, right? You have to provide the appraisal. You have to provide the evidence of why you're asking for it to change.
So Shannon, Shannon, if you had a addendum that the buyer upfront did the modified appraisal and said, hey, I'm willing to bring $10,000 in case it doesn't appraise for the sales price, do you still have to do the option number 4 and say, you know, let's say it was $450 and let's say the sales price was $450 and appraised for $440, you will not use the buyer elects to proceed. Although you had the addendum already attached, you will go for this one and put the appraisal value over here?
Yeah, because the sale price is changing.
Okay.
Okay, the sale price is changing. So if the sale price wasn't changing, then the buyer can just proceed.
I see.
But the sale price has to change in this case. So the seller has to agree to $10,000 less than what they agreed to before. This isn't just about the buyer. This is about the seller also. The seller is now losing $10,000. And what if the seller doesn't have $10,000 to lose, right? So we did, so the buyer said they would pay it, right? but maybe something happened, maybe some circumstance happened, or maybe it's more than 10,000, right? Maybe it's a $50,000 difference. And the buyer still said they would pay 10,000 over the appraised value, but that's a huge swing. So the seller doesn't have to accept that new sale price because they might not be able to move forward.
Shannon,
Can I ask a
a
question? Oh, go ahead, Veronica.
Oh, thank you. So you said that this one is unilateral, right? So let's say he decide on the first, the price is changed. So how the seller can accept if it's just a notice, right?
We will get there, Veronica.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Shannon, I have a question about this. I'm actually right now working with a contract that my buyer had said that it was an escalation competitive offer situation, and we said that we would pay 2,000 cash above estimated value, the appraised value. We're still waiting for the appraisal to come in, but so they offered $395, say it come, and the seller accepted that offer. So now if the appraisal comes in at $385 and we pay the 2,000 above so we would pay $387, does the seller still have the right to back out of that, even though they accepted that offer?
So what they didn't accept that they would reduce their price to any appraised value.
Okay.
Based on what you just said to me.
But they accepted that we would pay 2,000 above appraised value. What I wrote was, if home does not appraise for $395, buyer will pay 2,000 above appraised value.
Right. So what you did there, which is correct, because you used the verbiage that close to the verbiage that I provide, is you said what your buyer was willing to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's all we can do. I mean, I guess ultimately, if buyers wanted to obligate a seller to a minimum price, they could, but I don't know that it's a good idea in this market, right? It's the seller's market. The sellers aren't going to want to be pigeonholed by a buyer to commit upfront to some minimum price based on the appraisal.
Okay. I mean, they accepted the offer, so.
I understand, but what they accepted to do with the minimum price that they were willing to accept, it simply said that the buyer was willing to pay the difference between the appraised value and the sale price at a max of $2,000 out of pocket. Okay, so if that house appraises at $350, do you really think that the verbiage you wrote forces the seller to sell at $350?
No, I don't think it forces it, but I was just,
right.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, so I just don't, I think that the reason that we write the verbiage the way we do that says what the buyer's willing to do is so that, because we're writing offers from our buyers,
right?
We are trying to tell the seller what the buyer's willing to do. And the buyer is saying, look, appraisals are tough right now. We are willing to tell you upfront that we will do something for you if it doesn't appraise, because that's where the risk is if it doesn't appraise. Mm-hmm. In almost every single transaction, it's the appraisal that's the risk above all else. Okay. So we're not guaranteeing that the seller is going to do anything. We're guaranteeing that the buyer is going to do something. So now here, if it comes in low, the buyer is saying, okay, here's confirmation it came in low. I promised that I would pay X amount over the list price or over the appraised value, not to exceed the ratified contract price. So here's the new sale price where we would end up.
Okay.
Okay.
Shannon.
Yes.
This appraisal contingency notice, I haven't seen it before. Since when has been under? I never used it, even though I've been in different situations with appraisal.
Years.
Years, right?
Years, years and years and years.
Thank you for showing us today.
You're welcome. Okay. The last one on here is for FHA, USDA, and VA because they have that amendatory or notice of value clause in them. And it says the appraisal is less than the sale price and the buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of this contract. So what does this mean? This means that in conventional financing, the buyer needs to negotiate with the seller. They can't just void because the value came in low. But FHA, VA, and USDA financing, they can just void because the value comes in low. They are not forced to negotiate with the seller to reduce the price.
Shannon, what would you use if a property appraised under value and the seller and the buyer agreed that they're going to renegotiate and split the difference? Let's say it's $5,000 less. Buyer says, I'll bring 2,500, and the seller says, I'll reduce it by 2,500. Which option would you use?
So you have to start somewhere, right, on this. And so the new proposed sale price would go in option 4. And then no matter what happens with a change in the sale price, you need to include a sales contract addendum confirming what the new price is and where things are coming from sometimes. So it would all be memorialized on that sales contract addendum.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And so once the home appraised, we send this notice over to the listing agent?
Yes. Yes, once you have the appraisal back from the lender and it's been reviewed by the underwriters. Let me be clear. Sometimes the loan officer will call and say, hey, we just got the appraisal back and it looks good. The underwriter has it. Wait till the underwriter has cleared it before you do anything. The loan officer is just giving you a heads up at that point.
Okay.
Shannon, sorry. Can you clarify? Maybe I didn't understand about that. When you say that with FHA and VA, USDA, the buyer can decide to avoid, but with the conventional loan, you cannot. You must, you as a buyer, you must, decide and have a solution between you and the seller. What means that? I didn't understand that.
So back from our financing contingency addendums, it says on the conventional financing addendum that there's a negotiation period and then there's a buyer election period. So you have to go into that negotiation period if it appraises low.
Okay.
And try to work something out. And if you can't work something out, then the buyer gets to void.
Okay, so.
But what FHA, VA, and USDA have is that they don't have to negotiate. They can just void.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So if we're changing the sale price, we're negotiating away seller subsidy to make up for sale price, anything that's changing on the sale price at all, we would need a sales contract addendum to clarify whatever has been agreed to. I might suggest that in addition to this notice, when you deliver it to the seller side, that you also include the sales contract addendum that changes the sale price to whatever it is you're looking for, because then it's already prepared, it's already there. The seller can counter on that document, they can accept it, right? You're saving time. You're gonna send both documents at the same time. If your client is voiding, you do not need a separate notice to void based on the appraisal. This is a notice to void. If they're voiding based on something in here, that says the buyer declares the contract void, right? So that would be option 3 or option 5. You don't need a separate document. If you have negotiated, right, on option 4, and then the buyer elects to declare the notice void, then you'll need the other notice to void that I'm going to show you in a minute. Anytime you send a notice to void, you also need the release of sales contract and earnest money deposit, all right, which we will get to in a moment.
Can I have a quick question on the option number 4?
Sure.
So if the seller accept ratify the contract and the appraiser didn't appraise it on that price, what is the option for the seller?
So the seller can negotiate a new sale price. And
And
if
can the seller back up from the contract, or he has to negotiate the sale price?
on conventional financing, they have to negotiate. The seller can't void. It's a buyer election to void. It's not a seller contingency, it's a buyer contingency.
Okay, all right, thank you.
The seller's not forced to reduce the price. They're just forced to communicate.
Okay, so then that brings up the point that if they're not forced to reduce a price, but it's not something that they can walk away from in conventional financing, then wouldn't they kind of be pinholed into accepting what the buyer is willing to pay?
They're not. So let me go back here. Did it switch to day 4? Can you guys see me scrolling on day 4 items? Okay, I'm going to pull up the financing contingency on conventional for you guys. All right, this is day. Okay, conventional. All right, so what this says on conventional financing is that we have blank number of days, right? And it tells them in the document, this is the same as what we have on the removal addendum. It says, these are the choices. The appraisal is equal or greater to, the buyer elects to proceed no matter what the appraised value is. There's some issue and the lender has declined based on the type of collateral it is, so the buyer is going to void. Or the last D says that the appraisal is less than the sale price and the buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of the sales contract unless the seller elects to lower the sale price. Okay, so there's a negotiation period. The buyer sends their proposed new sale price, which cannot be lower than the appraised value. And then the buyer and seller have a certain number of days to work through it and see if they can come up with an agreement. If they can't, at the end of however many number of days you put here, then the buyer shall have the option to void the contract by delivering notice to the seller. Otherwise, the appraisal contingency is removed and the buyer technically has to move forward with the original sale price, regardless of what the appraised value was. So the seller has agreed already by accepting the conventional financing addendum and appraisal contingency that they know they're going to negotiate. They know that they don't have a choice to not negotiate when it comes to conventional financing. They have to talk it out. And they're not forced to any specific number. Obviously, they want the sale to go through, right? And that's why as a listing agent, it's super important to be talking to your clients about where you think the appraised value is going to come in and have them already decide up front what their plan is, should it not appraise. And that's why it's very important for a buyer and their agent to be having the same conversation. This is where we think it's going to appraise, and this is where your offer is. This is how much you said you were going to pay, but we still have all of this extra money out there in limbo that the seller might not be able to come up with. Be aware. Or I think we're really close. So by you offering the $5,000 or $10,000 to cover it, we should be fine because we should be right on with the appraisal. So it's all about studying the market and knowing what's happening and setting the expectations up front. Because if it's a huge disconnect between where it should appraise and where your contract ends up, unless everybody's expectations are set very clearly, you're setting up the transaction to fail. Okay, let's move on unless there are any burning questions still on that one document. And we can, of course, come back to it at the end, but I would like to get through these last couple with you. Notice voiding contract. This notice voiding contract is what I just mentioned, that if in that negotiation period you all don't come to any agreement and then the buyer goes into the election period, they would have to use this. Okay, this is also what's used if the buyer is voiding on home inspection or voiding on HOA docs. Okay, if they are delivering a notice to void based on a contingency that's allowed in the contract. So I want to be very clear that this is not to be used if the contingencies have expired and they don't have the contingency anymore and they're just hoping to kill the contract. What it says is, I, the undersigned party, hereby give written notice voiding the contract to, so this is when you're saying who you're giving it to, the seller or the purchaser. In most cases, the notice voiding the contract is given to the seller, and down here it says it's given by the buyer. So it would be to the seller by the buyer. There are only a couple of circumstances in our contract where there's a seller contingency that allows the seller to void. Most of the time, it's a buyer election to void. The notifying party hereby declares the contract void as permitted pursuant to paragraph blank of the contract or paragraph blank of whatever addendum. So what this says is paragraph whatever of the residential sales contract. That's the pages 1 through 13. So this is where if they were voiding on HOA docs, right, you would put in the HOA or condo doc paragraph. That's what they could void pursuant to, if that's what they're voiding on. Or paragraph whatever of the addendum to the contract. So this could be paragraph 1 of the home inspection and radon contingency addendum, if they're voiding on that. This could be a paragraph of a financing contingency addendum. You are telling the other side what permitted contingency allows you to declare the contract dead. What all of this says is that once this is delivered, the contract is dead. And that in addition to this, that the parties may need to execute an additional document to disperse the earnest money deposit back to the purchaser. And in our contract, it actually says that the seller must sign that document. And that's why seller and purchaser will comply with the void contract paragraph of our residential sales contract. That's what it's talking about. It says that they must sign the release. Okay. Unilateral. Be very careful when you're using this, that your client has the ability to use this. This document is generally accompanied by something else. Okay, in our contracts, it tells you when to use a notice, when to use a notice to void, and what goes with it. So for example, if your client is doing home inspection with right to void only, and they want to void, there are 3 things that you deliver at the same time. You deliver this document, the notice to void. You deliver the release of sales contract and earnest money deposit, and you deliver the full copy of the home inspection report. because that's what the contract says, is that the notice to void and the full copy of the inspection report must be delivered together in order to kill the contract. And then the release of contract and earnest money deposit is how your buyer gets their earnest money back in their own bank account. So make sure that if you have to deliver this notice to void, that you are also delivering any documents that the contract says must accompany this. Because if you don't, then you have not successfully delivered the notice. Any questions on that? Release of sales contract and deposit. This document says, once it is executed by everyone, it says all obligations under the contract have been released and discharged, and the parties cannot go sue each other for damages or come back and say, you still owe me this, this, that, whatever. It puts everybody back to the position they were prior to when the contract was entered into, okay? This is important because of when there's a default, right? If a party defaults in the contract, let's say the purchaser is actually really in default. And unfortunately in this market, I have had to tell some of our own agents that our own clients have defaulted and that their best course of action is to get this document signed and give the earnest money to the seller, because the limit to their liability then is the earnest money deposit going to the seller. They can't be sued for anything else. Sometimes that is the best course of action. If we fought it and the money would just sit in the escrow account to perpetuity, right, until a court order and a judge says, hey, this is where the money should go. And oh, by the way, there's actually more damages awarded to the seller, so the earnest money deposit can get applied to it, but you, Mr. Purchaser, owe $10,000 more, right? So sometimes this release is the best course of action. In order for the escrow agent to give the money back, even if it's clear who the money belongs to, this document has to be signed. What I will also say is that if you have a contingency where your buyer has the right to void and you don't send the notice to void and you simply send this release of sales contract and deposit, you're simply asking the seller to release your client, and the seller does not have to. The seller can sit on it until after the contingency expires and then say, sorry, you have no more way out. You have to go forward. So make sure that you are delivering the appropriate documents. Now, what happens if all of your contingencies are removed and something happens and there's an agreement that the seller is going to let the buyer out? This document is also what can be used because it's a mutual agreement that the contract is being ended and that everybody can go on their way based on how the deposit is being dispersed. Okay, and that's what goes in section C, is how the deposit is being dispersed. There's also a section that says the costs incurred for the title exam appraisal survey will be the responsibility of whomever. Okay, it's generally the purchaser. Very rarely would it be the seller unless it's the seller who needs the contract to be released. And in most of our cases, Universal Title is not charging anything for that title examination as a pass-through to the clients. Any questions on this?
How much could those costs be, just in case, you know, a purchaser, you know, you select purchaser and there are costs? I mean, how much money are we talking about? The appraisal?
Appraisal is like $500 or less. You know, title exams, a few $100. Survey, it depends on the size of the property and whether they had marks put in or not. You know, whether they had it marked or whether it was just the drawing. So it's not $10,000, right? It's like $1,000.
Gotcha. So you're saying if buyer is voiding and asking for a release, you should mark purchaser, but if seller for the very, a few reasons could void, the cost will be incurred by seller.
Yeah, I would say that would be appropriate. Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. No other questions on that? The other document I have for you right here is seller's notice requesting removal of financing contingency. So we talked yesterday on the financing contingency, where an automatic expiration, it goes all the way up until closing, until it's removed by way of a conditional commitment letter being delivered, or by this document being delivered by a seller. And then the buyer has 3 days to either void or it automatically goes away. So this is the document for the seller to send the formal notice. A listing agent sending an email saying, please remove your contingency does not count. Okay, it has to be this document signed by the seller and delivered to the buyer side. It's a risk for sellers to deliver this because the buyer can just void for any reason. The buyer can get mad at the seller for doing this, and then they can just void.
Is this the document you would use if you're going to go with a backup offer?
No. This doesn't have anything to do with backup offers. This has to do with their financing contingency in the contract.
Okay, so what was the situation where you had an offer in hand and you had 1 or 2 backup offers, and then at some point the seller can come back and say, okay, you need to perform, or you have 3 days to perform, or I'm going to go with the backup offer?
That would be the sales contract notice.
Shannon, can you give an example of why the seller would request a removal of the financing contingency if it would put them at risk? Why don't you just let it go right to closing and not worry about this?
There are certain circumstances that a lender might not be moving fast enough with their process when a listing agent is calling to get updates on, what's happening, how are we doing? They're not getting straight answers. They don't think that the buyer can perform. Okay. And so instead of letting it default, it gets them out faster so that they can get the house back on the market.
Okay, but if everything's proceeding normally, there's no reason to have this signed.
Correct.
Thank you.
And Shannon, I guess my question was about the kickout clause. Is this something that the seller would send if they want to use the kickout clause?
No, this is specific to the financing contingency.
Okay.
So I just scrolled back up to that notice dash sale.
Okay.
So you would put the verbiage on the notice of the document and deliver that.
Okay.
When it has to do with that kickout clause.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
So Shannon, the financing contingency gives me a lot of heartburn when it comes to longer closings, because if you have a 30-day closing, you can put 24 or 21 or 24 or 28 days, whatever it is, and then hopefully just let that expire so the sellers doesn't breathe down your neck. Mm-hmm. How do you handle that when you have 45 or 60-day closing and your contingency for financing in the main contract was 28 days or 30 days?
Well, if the closing's in 60 days and the contingency is only 28 days, then there's no way that they can truly remove the contingency and get to closing any easier with that contingency removed, right? Because final verification of employment and the credit refresh cannot be done
7 days before.
Right. Yeah, well, it's actually the final verification of employment now is 3 days before because of COVID.
Oh,
so,
gotcha.
Yeah. So it's setting expectations, right? If you have it at 28 days and it's on automatic extension, then hopefully that means that the lender is going to try to get everything else cleared before the end of that 28 days because of the risk to the buyer that the seller could deliver notice and have that contingency removed. But it certainly doesn't mean that the buyer can actually get to the closing table any easier, because if they lose their job on day 45, all it means is that their deposit's at risk.
Okay, gotcha.
Right.
So it's just informing the buyer that if they choose, if they're served the notice by the seller and they choose to just let it elapse because they're not going to void, they no longer have the financing contingency protection, and they could lose their earnest money deposit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I think this is our last document. Ooh, it is our last document. All right, walkthrough inspection. So the walkthrough inspection is what happens right before closing, the day of closing, right? You take your buyer through and you check to make sure that everything is in substantially the same condition as of the date specified in paragraph 10 of our contract, unless otherwise agreed to in writing, meaning home inspection, contingency addendum, or something else. This is an opportunity to walk through and test things, right? I go through in my walkthroughs and I flush toilets. I turn on lights. I turn the stove on. I turn the oven on. I'm turning all the faucets on, and I'm looking under the sink to make sure that there are no leaks, right? You're not looking to see whether they had the home freshly painted and the carpets cleaned for your buyer, right? That's not what we're doing. We're looking to see that these items that were listed as conveying are conveying in substantially the same condition. That's all it's asking, substantially the same condition, and that the home is free and clear of trash and debris. Now, I want to point out, if there are discrepancies, the choices are seller to correct discrepancies without an escrow, seller to credit buyer blank dollars, repairs are to be made and paid from funds held in escrow by the settlement agent, and those funds are or are not the limit of the seller's liability. Okay, so what does that mean? What that means is, let's say they're holding $2,500 in escrow for a repair, but the repair ends up being $5,000. If you put are not the limit of the seller's liability, then that means that the seller might have to pay that extra $2,500 to equal the $5,000 in repair. But if it says that they are the limit of the seller's liability and they held $2,500 and the bill comes back to $5,000, then the buyer has to pay that extra. Okay, so be careful there. I want to be clear that those are your choices. None of those choices say buyer does not proceed with settlement.
Shannon,
Yes.
is that applied to the as-is house as well?
Well, and all houses are as is, but as is means that it's as is as of the date of whatever specified, right? So if there's something that's substantially different from what was agreed to, then you can discuss it.
Do these
So give me an example.
I mean, I have a client right now, they bought a house as is. The seller told me that they are not fixing anything, changing anything. Whatever you see right now here, this is what you're getting. So obviously we're gonna do a walkthrough before the closing, but do we have to make sure that the stove is working and everything else is working again, or no?
So if you marked in paragraph 10 that it was as is condition as of the date of offer, and all of it was working on the date of offer, and then you get to closing and it's not working, then technically the seller is responsible to fix it. But if those are working when you made the offer, and that's what was marked in your paragraph 10, then no, they don't have to fix anything. It all has to do with delivering the home at closing in a condition that is substantially the same as what was agreed to in paragraph 10.
Okay.
Okay.
These remedies have to be made before closing? Because if you're like doing a walkthrough day of or day before, is there time?
No, these are not things, these are remedies that happen after closing. Right, that's what the escrow means, is that, that their funds are being held after closing. Or they're just giving a credit to the buyer at closing, right, on the settlement statement. So these are all, this is all for remedies for the buyer for closing, and then it will be taken care of after.
So on this, Shannon, you'll have to check with your lender, right? If they will even allow an escrow, right? Because there's certain lenders like mine that does not allow escrows.
Yeah, certain lenders, certain loan types, you cannot have an escrow, and sometimes adding a credit at the last minute creates a bit of a headache as well. So sometimes we have to think outside the box. And this goes back to when I was talking about our home inspection contingencies, and that if you have picky buyers, just ask for a credit up front, because you're less likely to run into these scenarios. If the home was not in a great condition, or there was something that made your client nervous when the offer was made, that might be why you use the couple of days prior option to do the walkthrough, and then come through again right before closing, just to make sure that nothing was leaking and, you know, the ceiling didn't fall in, kind of thing, so that you have time to remedy prior to closing. In most cases, we're doing so many as is and without any additional repairs right now. But I think that I think there is a discrepancy on the part of the buyers, that they think doing the walkthrough means everything has to be working, even if they didn't do a home inspection or they didn't check anything at the date of offer. They actually have to have proof that things were working when they made the offer if they didn't do a home inspection.
So Shannon, the walkthrough inspection sheet is a potential supplement, but not mandatory.
The walkthrough sheet is a required compliance item in command.
Is that recent? Because I don't recall ever doing one of these.
I have always required it, and I will tell you that it is required for you and not for me. Because if there is ever a question later about what the condition was, or if something broke, or whose responsibility it was, did the buyer actually do their walkthrough, did they check things, etc., and you have put in your walkthrough sheet, then we have more protection. I also will suggest, if you are the listing agent in a transaction, please go walk through before the buyer's walkthrough. Don't be surprised by what the buyer's going to tell you. Go be proactive and go do the walkthrough first, because you might find something. It happens. You may find something, and then you can call the buyer's agent and say, I just walked through and XYZ happened, and I'm calling my seller, and this is our remedy, right? Instead of the buyer's agent walking through and being like, what are we gonna do? Okay, walk through first.
Great, thank you.
Shannon,
Yes,
are you suggesting that we do a mini walkthrough before we before we submit a contract? Because if we're saying that it's as, you know, it was working on the day of ratification of the contract, that but we don't know if we haven't done that. We're assuming it works.
Yeah, so ratification is not a choice. It's date of offer, date of home inspection, date of closing, or other.
But if you're doing date of offer, how do you know?
Because you showed the home.
Okay, so when we're showing the home, we should go ahead and turn on some of these, you know, check out some of this basic stuff that we're, you know, does it work or not?
So this is why I do not ever want buyers to not do a home inspection. I want date of offer marked for the condition clause, and then home inspection is going to verify that things were working, because that's going to be the next closest date to that date of offer, right? So physical condition isn't just for the mechanical features, which is why I suggest choosing date of offer, okay? Because it covers a lot more than just the mechanics. Then the buyer goes in at date of home inspection and does their home inspection. And then they verified, right, that things were in working condition. So it's not likely that something was not in working condition on the date of offer, and then 5 days later when the buyer comes in, it is in working order. And then you go to closing and it's not in working order, right? That's not likely. So that's why I don't ever think it's a good idea for the buyers, unless they are 100% aware of the risks that they are taking, to not do a home inspection.
Okay.
Yeah, but they don't understand it. I had this situation with my house. My client, they didn't check anything. They waived the inspection, and despite 100 times that I told them, they said, no, we don't want to do inspection. And I made them sign that paper that I already told you everything. After that, they start asking the question of, this is working, this is not working, how it works. And because I told them this is as is, I mean, my client went crazy, but went to the, even they sent the email to the listing agent themselves, which I had to talk to the listing agent and let them know that I didn't provide the email, and they went to the contract. So anyway, but they still were asking a lot of questions from the seller. That seller said, hey, you could do an inspection, but you waived it.
Right, and sometimes we can weed through that and sort through that during that buyer consultation time on whether or not they truly understand what it means or not before we ever get to the offer time. And there are some times, remember, in those consultations, we're interviewing the clients as much as they're interviewing us when we are meeting with them. Not every client is who we need to sign up to work with. And if we think that there's going to be a risk to that client or to us, or that the client is not receptive to our expertise in how we're communicating with them, and they simply want us to be a glorified door opener, that might not be the client we want to spend time with. We might want to spend time with someone else. So please remember, you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you, and that not every client is the right client for you. And so those consultations are super important for that, so that you don't get into a situation later on.
Shannon, are we allowed to ask questions in regards to anything that we went over today, or not yet?
Yes, so we can ask questions about anything that we have gone over all week, because we are finished with the documents that I had to go over. Yay! Congratulations, guys.
Thank you, first of all.
Yeah, I have a quick question on the walkthrough.
Oh, wait, okay, I'll grab you after, Anya.
I'm so sorry.
Okay. Cutting in line, Sherry. No, I'm just
no. I just want to clarify.
I have to.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I have two questions. One will be a clarification. One is a question. On the conveyances, contingencies and clauses.
Yeah.
When we are doing contingent on a seller purchasing another home contingency, can we upfront negotiate that with a post-settlement occupancy just in case? if there's a really shaky seller that says, oh my God, like I don't want to be homeless and I'm worried that I'm not going to find anything, especially in this market.
Yes.
Is it smart to use both the contingency on seller finding a home of choice and then negotiating, you know, a post-settlement occupancy just in case upfront?
It is. And I think that that gives some peace of mind to a seller where they have time to go find the home, and it actually gives them some wiggle room in their negotiations on the other property, right?
Okay.
So that they don't have to move out immediately, right? It gives them some flexibility on how they negotiate that property. So yes, you can use both.
Great, thank you so much. And then the second one is I am still confused. I've always been using the appraisal contingency notice on my contracts. Fortunately, I never had an issue that we had to void or renegotiate or whatever to the matter that things fell through. I am still unclear about option number 4 in a scenario when a buyer up front does the agrees to pay a certain price, and if the price comes back, so if let's say for the round numbers, let's say the buyer was willing to pay $500,000 for a home, and they agreed, because it was a multiple offer situation, they agreed to bring $10,000 to closing in case of low appraisal, right? So it could be any amount up to that $10,000. And then the appraisal came back and it appraised at $490,000. So the delta of whatever is the discrepancy between the appraisal and what the buyer's willing to bring covers that $10,000. Do we still select option number 4, to the appraisal less than the sales price, yada, yada, yada. And then in the sales price, we put that $490?
No, because in that scenario that you just gave, your sale price is not actually changing.
Okay, so we will say that the buyer elects to proceed with the consummation.
Correct.
Okay, great. So when would this apply? This would apply if the buyer was willing to bring $10,000, but the sales price, the appraisal value came back below whatever was the $10,000 difference. So if it came back at $480?
That's right. So anytime that the ending sale price would be below what was on page 1 of the contract is when you use option 4.
I see. Okay, got it. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Sherry, you're up.
I just wanted to know, because I had another agent tell me, if there's no discrepancies on the walkthrough, do you still have to get the seller and the buyer to sign at the bottom?
No.
Okay, that's what I thought.
The bottom is only if it needs to be an agreement because of discrepancies for buyer and seller. Otherwise, the top section is just for the buyer to sign, acknowledging that everything's okay. Or, I mean, they can even acknowledge discrepancies, but they're not asking for anything to be taken care of, right? It's only when there needs to be an agreement from the seller to do something that the seller has to sign it.
Okay.
Good question. I see all the time where both sides sign, and I'm like,
well, I had an agent argue with me, and I said, well, there's no discrepancies. Why would you have to have both sides? That's only meant for that. And
yes, you're trained better than other agents.
We have been.
Shannon, would you clarify back in the contract too, when this whole business about accepting the house at time of offer versus the inspection? Because it seems like the inspection is much more thorough, and it seems, and since there's photographs taken at that time, it seems like that would be the better time to indicate on the contract. But you're suggesting to do it with the offer when we don't have the photographs, when we only have the listing photographs. So I just want a greater clarity as to why you're suggesting that we check the box with the offer.
Sure. So, so I'll give you 2 examples. One example is the one that I talked about the other day, which is the refrigerator dies. And the refrigerator that was in the home at the time of the offer is one of fancy LG refrigerators that washes your clothes for you and watches your kids and orders your groceries and puts them away and cooks your dinner, right? It's one of those high-end refrigerators. And from the time of the offer and the time of the home inspection, a week goes by, and the seller has decided that they want to take this fancy LG refrigerator to their new house, and they are going to bring a refrigerator that is not as fancy and swap them, basically. So now you just have a stainless steel side by side with ice maker refrigerator in the kitchen. So substantially the same condition as of the date of offer would mean the LG refrigerator stays. Substantially the same as the date of home inspection means the buyer gets the side by side refrigerator. Okay, so that's one example. Second example would be, let's say there was some sort of damage that happened to the home. And it was maybe the seller was actually moving out in between the date of offer and date of home inspection, and the movers dropped a piece of furniture on the wood floor on their way out. And so now there's this huge gash in the wood floor. Well, substantially the same condition as of date of offer, there wasn't a gash in the wood floor. So they don't have to go through the headache of having that repaired. But substantially the same condition as of home inspection, substantially the same condition as of offer means they have to fix it, right? As of home inspection, that's what the condition was. There's a gash in the floor, I'm sorry. So those are two examples of why, because when the buyer walks through the home and puts an offer in, their expectation is that the home is going to be what they remember it to be when they put the offer in. Not any change that could have occurred between when they put the offer in and when the home inspection was. Additionally, when the home inspection occurs, yes, there are photos, right? So it is just further evidence of the condition of the home a couple of days after the date of the offer, not necessarily coming up with a new condition. Okay, does that help?
It helps, but I don't know. I just differ with you on that, although you have much more experience than I do. So the photographic evidence would seem to outweigh, because then there's clarity.
So why don't you have photographic evidence from the listing?
Because the listing doesn't necessarily show any or all defects in the home, and it's easily, when you're going through multiple homes, even though you're taking some time, you're not going to see everything, where the inspector is going to tend to, I expect, I understand what you're saying about the refrigerator and the LG. I've not found that to be normal. That would be an abnormal situation. I'm sure it is possible, and I'm sure there are sellers who have done such things. But the photographic evidence would seem to, because that's what the buyer will be able to latch onto and say, oh yeah, I remember this now, but I didn't remember this when we did, when we walked through to make the initial offer.
Yeah, so every single contract, that I've written, every offer I've written in all of my years has had date of offer.
So Shannon, when would be appropriate time to use the date of home inspection? Is there?
If it's sight unseen.
Got it.
So that's the first time your client's going into it. That's the only time I would use it.
That happened to someone I know with a washer and dryer. It was replaced with two that were not anywhere near what had been in there when they walked through.
Yeah. Good questions. What other questions might you guys have?
Shannon?
Yes, Dory?
So let's go back to appraisal process. Oh, let me turn on my video. So let's say that you do have a situation where the appraisal does come in lower. Is there, and maybe the appraiser isn't necessarily familiar with the area, brought in from another area, and you're looking through the appraisal and realize that the comps just don't really measure up to what they should. Is there a way, is there a process to appeal that?
There is. The buyer has to do that, and it's through their lender.
Okay.
Hi, Shannon. I have a question. I know you already answered to Bill, but I'm talking about the walkthrough inspection.
Okay.
So you said that when you find an offer, me as a buyer, so we can offer and the listing agent put the house as is, right? Now, on the offer, when I make an offer for my client, on the offer, it just says what does convey the property. So in this case, it's just said that there is washer and dryer, dishwasher, you know, where there is the flag. Of course, it doesn't say on the offer that it works, it does not work. And I choose for my client to do the home inspection to avoid void only. In this case, do I still need to do the walkthrough inspection? You say to Bill, yes, because it can be that doesn't work or is not work. But on the offer, it doesn't say that work or not. And in the home inspection, you cannot, you know, it's only void only. So you don't need the walkthrough, right? Sheets, I think.
So on what the walkthrough is doing is it's verifying that the condition is what it was as what you marked in paragraph 10. So if you did the home inspection with right to void only, and the washer and dryer worked, and at the walkthrough they didn't work, then you could ask the seller to fix them.
Also, if in the offer it says that the seller is list the house as is not willing to fix anything at the moment of the offer. So,
right.
You know,
so right. What it's saying is that they're not going to fix anything in the home inspection, right? But it still says that they have to turn the home over to the buyer in the condition it was when the offer was entered into. It can't be in less of a, in a lesser condition, right? Just because it's as is doesn't mean that everything can then be broken after the home inspection and that the seller has no requirement to fix it.
when you say the condition as is on the offer, it means in this case, when you make an offer, when we go and see the houses, we should, you know, the part that says convey is just say what convey, what doesn't convey. It doesn't say that it works, right?
So what it is saying that we're giving you the home in this condition at in the snapshot, right? So the home inspection or the date of offer or whatever is checked is saying, okay, we're recording what the condition was as of this day. I'm not fixing anything to make it different based on your home inspection, right? So if something's not working based on your home inspection, that's okay. You have to take it.
Okay, you have to take it.
If the washer and dryer doesn't work on the, right? I'm not fixing it. But if I told you something was working and you verified something was working and then at closing it's not working, I have to fix it. But if you already figured out that it wasn't working at your home inspection and it's still not working at closing, that's okay. That matches, right?
So I was thinking when it says as is, also if it doesn't work after, is still not willing to.
But that's not as is. That's different. That's as different, not as is.
And what it would be?
Well, it would be different. And so then they'd have to fix it because it's different. So I think this might be a language thing. for us to work on later, right? With explaining what the terms mean.
Okay.
Can I? All right. What other questions do you guys have? Nothing?
Scenario that Veronica was just describing. So if you did date of offer and the Havoc system was working on the date of offer, date of home inspection, it wasn't working. The as-is condition would apply to the fact that when you did the offer, if you checked that and not the home inspection date, that the seller would be required to repair that. Is that correct?
So if you had proof that it was working, but if on the home inspection it was not working, that's when you say to the seller, the HVAC system was fine. When we walked through, we could feel the air conditioner was blowing just fine. And when we came for the inspection, it's not. Here in writing, you're going to fix it before closing, because it says unless otherwise agreed to in writing. So that's the opportunity to have it memorialized, right?
So
I think that makes sense.
What
And now, yes, thank you, Story. Thank you.
Well, what kind of proof could you have, though? Let's say, if independently whether there's a home inspection or not, let's say the buyer waived the home inspection and you select a day of offer, obviously. What kind of proof would the buyer have to show that something was working and now the home inspection, it is not working? Like, how can you argue that? That, you know, we saw, we turn it on or whatever.
You mean at walkthrough? Yeah, that's the issue with waiving the home inspections.
So you have to take it.
It's the risk
as is, because you don't know. What if what if, let's say, they turn something on? I don't know, whatever could it be? Let's say they turn on the stove and actually saw that the stove was working, and now they go to the walkthrough. They didn't do a home inspection. They go to the walkthrough, and the stove is not working. How can a buyer prove that it was in a working condition? Didn't take a video, or I don't know.
Right. So, right. And when it comes to systems and appliances, that's why we do home inspections, right? I mean, because other than taking a video or a picture or having an email chain with the lender, or I'm sorry, with the listing agent that says, you know, we're confirming that all of these were in proper working condition, or adding it to the contract somehow that these were checked, right? And that these were in proper working condition, you don't. And so it is a huge risk, and the buyers don't understand what they're actually signing up for when they waive that inspection.
So basically out of luck, like if we can't prove it, it's not working, you can't just say, hey, I'm not showing up for closing. You have to go.
That's right. And so they would have to have evidence to take to court that a judge is going to, if the seller doesn't agree, right? Because that's also a conversation that, hey, can the seller, you know, this was working, you know, we know it was working, and now it's not, can the seller fix it, right? So, I mean, there are certain circumstances, like what if you took the buyer during an open house, right? And then they want to look at it, they want to make the offer later, okay, in that day. And it was the listing agent that was in the open house and the air conditioner was working, right? Well, so the listing agent knows the air conditioner was working on the date of offer because they were in the house, you met them, right? Are they really going to risk their license and say, no, I didn't know if it was working, right? Like they were there. So there are certain circumstances, but ultimately the risk is on the buyer when they waive inspections.
Thank you.
And Shannon, as far as the walkthrough, doesn't it also protect us as an agent? Because I know I did a walkthrough and just prior to a closing, and the very next day the motor on the air conditioner went after the closing.
Yep. Yeah. So here's the other thing, guys. If your clients are getting a home warranty and you don't have a home inspection, or you don't have a walkthrough saying that you checked everything to say that it was working, you're going to have some issues with that home warranty company if you file a claim day after closing or 2 days after closing, because they're going to ask, show me proof. So food for thought there. So anyway,
All right, one final quick question from me. Just using the walkthrough inspection document at the top where it says property, is the simple street address sufficient, or does it have to have the legal description?
the address is fine on there.
Okay, thanks.
Shannon, do
Thank
we
you,
have
Shannon.
time? Do we have time to go back to the addendum that it talks about waiving, doing the home, doing the home inspection for info only without the option to void? So could you show us what can we strike, what verbiage needs to be removed? If not,
Yeah.
we can do this. I can call you independently.
Yes, let's see what other questions we have and how much time we're going through, and then I will, if we have time, I will pull that addendum back up.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I have a question about the home inspection that we were just talking about with the HVAC. So we just had a situation, we're going to closing the end of January, but my gift to my client was the warranty. The HVAC is not working, and they've said that they will bring it to working condition. But on my home inspection, it states that the HVAC system isn't working. So in order to make sure that the home warranty is going to cover it in case it dies even a month after they get into the house, is there anything that I need to do to ensure that it will be covered?
Well, I'm not sure what was agreed to as far as how the bring it to working condition is, but if it's being brought to proper working condition by a licensed HVAC contractor, then they're going to have to provide documentation showing that it was, and that would help.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, other questions or ahas? If we don't have questions, we can move into ahas.
The fact that if you were your home warranty, you should definitely do the home inspection. For
Yeah, I just saw your face on that one.
That was at least one aha. That's a bunch more.
Awesome, awesome. What else?
And the walkthrough is very important before,
Yeah.
I think an awareness of the different forms that we should be submitting with the various scenarios. I'm sure that there's going to be many times I have to come back and go, I know we need this, but what exactly do we put here?
Right.
And a lot of new forms that I didn't even have an idea that exist.
I know.
Well, good. I'm glad now you know they exist, right?
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Shannon, thank you very much. This has been an exceptional week, and I appreciate all of your knowledge and expertise, and it's been very helpful.
Well, thank you guys. You guys are going to get an email, I think later today, from Melinda Rust. She's our agent services coordinator in Falls Church, and it's going to be a survey about how the class was. I ask that you guys take just a couple minutes to provide that feedback. It helps us to know if there is something we're missing, something that we need to do better for next time, or something that really helped you so that we know to keep it for next time in our classes. So please, if you don't mind, take a few extra minutes for me. I know you've spent a lot of time with me this week, but I would greatly appreciate if you could take time to do that survey for me. It's only, 6 or 7 questions. It shouldn't take you very long. And thank you guys. I will post these, all the videos. I will make sure that they are posted later. If they haven't been, YouTube was giving me a hard time yesterday. So hopefully it will be nicer today because it's Friday. And Anya, if you want to stay on with me, I'll pull back up that addendum and we will work on what the appropriate strike-throughs are.
Thank you.
Shannon?
Have a great day, guys.
Thank you so much.
Hello?
Yes, to
Yes.
him.
Can you, can you